I think we really need to think about how do you apply all the powers and think about your own life in this terms of thread. What is that thread running through your life that's leading you to an unknown destination? Because if you were on that thread, you're going in harmony with your life. If you go against it, as I was at Honeywell, you're in disharmony and you can't be the most effective. Okay? And this is a challenge because you've had a lot of challenges to put in her. People have expectations for it. So we're going to play a little tape here. One of my favorite poets is Mary Oliver that you saw the first quote from. She was here this spring or summer, and David White talks about her. Can you just go ahead and turn that on? We're just going to listen to one poem. That's it. I did tell the thread, okay? And okay. Got it?
I wanted to work with poems of self-compassion this evening and the recovery of innocence. I tend to look at innocence and experience as two opposing forces. And now we have so much innocence when we come into the world. And that slowly, as the years go by, it gets worn away until hopefully there's just enough at the end to take you through. I want to take another look at that and say what would it be like to see it differently and not to choose so much between innocence and experience. And to see innocence as a kind of vital force which lives within us. Something that must be kept alive at all times, in all ways. So I'll start with a poem by a woman struggling towards her innocence. Mary Oliver, a poem called The Journey. She's leaving the house in which she lives. In the spiritual traditions, there's always the metaphor of coming home, that you're going home somehow. But the strange thing is, in order to go home, you usually have to leave the home you're living in at the moment. So first you leave the house in order to make the journey to come back to the house. So here's Mary Oliver, remarkable East Coast poet from the States. And she says, one day you finally knew what you had to do. You know those days, once every 10 years or so. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their better side. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their better side, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. So the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, which kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. And there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. This determination to save the only life you could save. On the surface sounds quite selfish, but the line where she says that she is striding deeper and deeper into the world tells you that it's not. She's determined to save the greater life that is possible for her. It's the life that belongs to the world. It's the life of her destiny. And that whenever we take a step towards that greater life, there's always a possibility of betraying others, and those people will say, mend my life, don't come back, don't go, don't go, don't go, don't go. But you didn't stop, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundation, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. Mary Oliver says, you want to know what it's like when you take that step outside your house and leave that confining identity around and go out on the road of life? That's what it feels like. It feels like as if you're leaving at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of a windstorm. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save.
Okay, thank you. Anyone ever had that experience where you had to leave home, you had to go out, and everyone's telling you, don't do this thing, don't do it, but you said, I'm going to listen not to all the voices around me, I'm going to have to follow my own inner voice. That's what I heard Penny describing when she said, you know, I'm going to leave the practice psychology and follow my inner voice. And think about, maybe there have been times in your life when you had to follow that voice and people were saying, this is not what you're supposed to do. Well, who's to say? You know, only you can determine what your life is going to be. And when you are, then you're at one with yourself, and until you determine what is your life going to be. And it will be that opportunity too in the future, where you'll be stepping up to that unexpected opportunity, and people will say, don't do it, don't. And you say, you know, you go through it, and yeah, it's tough, because there's everything, you're leaving us, you're abandoning us, why are you going off to do this? But it's what you have to do, determined to save the only life you could save. And I think this process requires a lot of development, and this is really a personal guide that's aimed at trying to help you go through that process. I'm going to quickly cover some of the key points. I'm not going to have enough time to really do it, but there's like 5 or 6 key things that you get into here. What do you have to do to develop yourself as a leader who's prepared to take on those opportunities? I don't think you wait until the time, you know. Leadership is a development process. You saw Michael Phelps win 8 gold medals. Yeah, and they did all this thing about analyzing his body and what he had an abnormally unusual body and all this stuff. That meant, hey, you know, the kid's in the pool 5 hours a day, guys. How would you like to swim 5 hours a day? You know, if you want to know Mike Phelps' real story, it happened the day after he got his 8th gold. He's standing there with his mother, and this young man comes up to say, hey, Mike, nice to see you again. And he says, do I know you? And he said, yeah, we went to high school together. You don't remember me? Gee, I'm sorry, I don't remember you. And the young man leaves, and Mike, his mother turns to him and said, gee, you were kind of cold to that guy. Did you really not know him? He said, oh, I remember that kid. When I was a skinny little kid in 7th grade, that was the kid that was always beating up on me on the playground. And so here's a guy that sees himself still in the image of that skinny little kid that's going to work and work and work and work. And many of us still have that, if you will, that image of ourselves as the child that's overcoming something or overcame something in our early years, and that's fueling us, and it isn't all bad, you know. I think the first thing we have to do is gain self-awareness. Jeff Immelt almost got fired at GE. He was put in a really tough job. He was missing his budget. He could have gotten back on just by breaking the contracts he had. He said that would violate my values, and so he stayed with it. He was getting a lot of critical feedback. At a certain point in time, he said, you know, leadership is a long journey into your own soul. Leadership is a long journey into your own soul. At times like these, it's not like anyone else can tell you how to do it. You know, you have to go inside yourself and say, what do I want to come out of this? And how am I going to make it happen? You know, I got all the advice, I got all the inputs, I got all the feedback, but now it's up to me. I got to pull through this situation. No one can do it for me. And that's gaining that level of self-awareness of who am I in this world and who do I want to be, and can I really be myself, or I have to go off to some darn recruiter or some person that's trying to admit me somewhere and pretend to be something different than I am. You know, all my MBA students are faced with this terrible crisis of some recruiter wants them to be something different than they are. They want to be that beautiful piece of paper, you know, that never had any difficult times in their life, instead of being that real person that isn't sure they want this job anyway. And so that's gaining that level of self-awareness. The second thing is being true to your values. You know, anyone can stand up and tell you values you ought to have. This is nonsense. I've had students say to me, are you going to teach us values? No, no one can teach you values. You have to know what your values are, but you won't know until you're under pressure. When things are going well, it's easy to practice good values. That's not hard. What's really hard is under pressure. One of the people we talked to in the book is a guy who worked with David Gergen during the Richard Nixon administration, a guy named John Huntsman. John was 29 years old. He was working for Bob Haldeman, the chief of staff for Nixon, probably the second most powerful person in the United States. One day, Haldeman calls him into his office. He said, Huntsman, we got a problem. there's a congressman out in California that's opposing President Nixon's initiatives here, and he owns a factory out there, and we're going to teach this guy a lesson. So I want you to call a different plant manager. Here's his number. I want you to call him now, and I want you to tell him to place 12 illegal immigrants in this factory this congressman has part ownership of. And then on Monday, we're going to send the federal agents in on a sting operation to catch him for employing illegal immigrants. So Huntsman dutifully calls the plant manager, goes back to his office, calls the plant manager, and he said about 15 minutes into this conversation, my inner moral compass made itself notice. And he said, you know, I said to the plant manager, I said, you know, why don't you just forget I ever called? I don't want to play this game. But he said, in that instant, I knew that was the end of my career in the White House, because I had to make a decision between two things I really valued. I was totally loyal to the President of the United States and my integrity. And I chose my integrity. And years later, he was facing bankruptcy with a company he owned 100% of, and he'd taken a lot of debt down. And everyone's saying, declare bankruptcy. He said, that would destroy my integrity as a man. But he remembered back to this experience 30 years before of what it was like. And so sometimes those early values tests in your life, when you're forced and you almost go the wrong way, or you do go the wrong way, and you have these conflicts. It's not so easy. Really are tests. The third thing is more operating in your sweet spot where your motivations and your capabilities come together. Now, you know, all of us like recognition. We like to get good grades. We like to get these fellowships. We like to be told we're doing a great job. We like to say we've accomplished this. We have a great resume. Guys, gals, these are all extrinsic motivations. There's nothing wrong with these things, but if that's all you're motivated by, then you're giving yourself over to the world. You're going to let the external voices, the media's approval drive your life, or financial considerations, or recognition, or money, fame, power, and glory. Think about your intrinsic motivations. What are those things, like you were talking about when you get to the end of your days? What are those things that really matter? Is it building an organization? Is it helping other people? Is it making a difference in the lives of other people? Is it building your own self and your own family? What are all those things that are really intrinsic? And I say, don't get rid of the extrinsic, but have some kind of balance in your life between the intrinsic and the extrinsic. Don't get caught up like I was with trying to have the title of CEO. Think about, why do you want to do that at all? You know, don't let yourself get caught up in that. And then find a position that you're highly motivated by and that uses your greatest capabilities. Like, I love to coach soccer, except I'm not good enough because I was never a soccer player, so I don't have the capabilities. So you can't just have the motivation, you know, you have to have the capabilities and play to your strengths. There's no sense playing to your weakness. If you're not a financial whiz, you don't have to be. Just pair yourself up with one, but you don't put yourself in a position where you're going to Goldman Sachs and pretending to be a financial whiz, you know. I mean, find an opportunity where you're using your motivated capabilities, which I call your sweet spot. And when you're in that sweet spot, I can guarantee you'll be successful. And if people work with you, you can put them in a sweet spot, they'll be successful as well. The fourth thing, I think, is building a support team around you. You know, Penny and I, we went through our difficult times, so we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to have her. Your support team starts with having one person in your life. Could be your spouse, could be your best friend, could be your significant other, could be your mentor, but at least one person, maybe your therapist. It could be one person with whom you can be totally gut level honest and open. You can let it all hang out. All the things you hate about yourself, you don't like about yourself, all the things you've done in your life. If you can have one person like that, it's extremely helpful to have someone there for you. I think mentors are really important too. Having mentors that can kind of see things that you don't see. We all have blind spots. They can help us see our blind spots and to whom we can be vulnerable. I have a men's group I'm meeting with for over 30 years. Penny and I have a couples group of 8 people. We're meeting for 25 years. Once a month, the men's group meets weekly. We talk about life. We talk about what's really important in life. When Penny had breast cancer, I was in denial that she could possibly die. I said, well, she'll be well. You know, they'll do the surgery and she'll be okay. Well, that's nice to think. Statistically, you know, there's a significant possibility she wouldn't be okay. And so I could go to my men's group and they could help me through, see why I was in denial because of the early experiences of my life. I wasn't going to face this again, you know, and so they could really help me. So having a group like that can be extremely valuable. That's why in my course at Harvard Business School we form into 6-person groups to have the opportunity with people you can share and share openly. The final thing, and I'm going to ask Penny to come up. Well, let me talk about purpose briefly. Taught a case on Wendy Kopp the other day. Here's a woman that found her purpose early of trying to make a difference in education, to think that every person can have an education. I told you about Andrea Jung. She found her purpose late about helping people achieve economic self-sufficiency. But one of the really important things to think about, what is the purpose of your leadership? You may have to struggle to get there. I thought I knew, but then it took me 20 years to find the right place to carry it out. But what is the purpose of your leadership? Because if you don't have a purpose, why do people want to align and affiliate with you if you aren't clear about that? And how can you align it to a greater purpose to take on the real challenges of the world, which I'd like to encourage you all to think about doing in your lifetime. And then finally, and the big question that we want to address for the rest of this time is, can you have a great, successful career and a great family and home life? Can you do it all? Can you have a spouse or significant other? Can you have a two-career family? Can you have children? Can you be active in the community? All of you have been active in the community. Can you stay active in the community when you have 3 little kids at home, and your spouse is working, you're working, Can you do it all? And so we're going to talk about how we wrestle with that, and then probably try to let you talk in table groups a little bit, and then try to entertain some questions. So this is how, come on up, and we'll try to wrestle with it, because it's not been, you want to sit here? It's not been easy, I can tell you. Penny, I'm not an easy person to live with. I'm not an easy person in that regard, because I've wanted my career, I've wanted a good home life. We're lucky to have 2 great sons. Penny took 4 months off after our first son was born, 11 months after our second son was born, but she worked the whole time. They were growing up. They're both very proud of their mother now. But, going back and forth between daycare, international travel, and we had a very strong, our oldest son is extremely strong-willed and somewhat hard to control when he was 2, 3, 4, 5, and his father was in Japan for 10 days, and mother was home alone and still trying to work and doing reports in the evening after the kids went to bed. So leading in it, and I think really the key is, how do you stay true to what you want? Even now, we're doing a little commuter marriage, Penny says, but I don't see it quite that way, but she does. So, do you want to comment on some of the challenges of how you try to integrate life, work, career, family, community, and all those things?
I'm not sure, actually. My mind is, this is totally unscripted, and it's not a conversation.
That's the way to do it, leadership
really
unscripted.
Ever had publicly like this before, so I'm not quite sure where to go, other than that I know you guys are feeling that as well. That is a challenge, and someone once said, I think it was Bill's head of human resources in one of the organizations, you can't have 2 jet engines in a marriage, and I thought, well, that's fine, because I'm not a jet engine, and I'm one of those people in the bleachers, but I'm also
not anymore.
I'm a first child, and he's an only child, so I don't submit easily, and so there are always tensions in that regard, and I think that's, in the end, if you work it through and you develop the skills, it's a plus, because we each come to the relationship filled up. We each have things that we're passionate about that we bring to the marriage. But I think taking advantage of, of skill development, relationship skills, because otherwise you're in a position of just repeating what you saw at home. And if that's great, that's wonderful, but I haven't heard too many people talk about how wonderful, in terms of communication skills, that parents were because they didn't have training around that. Nowadays that exists. There also is, therapy, family therapy, individual therapy. There are a lot of things that can be adjuncts to what you bring into your marriage from your home.
How many of you, just a little survey here, think that over the next 30 years you would like to be in a long-term committed relationship with a partner who was working and also have children? Okay, that's pretty good. I used to, if there's a blackboard here, I'll write it up here, okay? Here's the formula for you guys. This is the real world. This is what you don't want to hear. Here's the formula, okay? Mathematical formula for you mathematician in the audience. 1 plus 1 plus 1. This is your full-time job, your partner or spouse's full-time job, and raising kids. Anyone tells you that raising kids is not a full-time job, think again. This is a little naive. I said when our oldest son was born, he's not going to change our lives. Wrong, okay? 1 plus 1 plus 1 is unequal to 2, guys. You got 2 lives. So you have to figure out, how are you going to do it? How are you going to make it all work? Both our sons and daughters-in-law are trying to figure this out right now. We have 2 doctors on one side of the family, 2 MBAs on the other, and I can tell you, it's not easy. So I think I'd like to take about 10 minutes at your table groups and just talk about this question, and what are the things you're wrestling with, and how are you going to deal with it during your lifetime? How are you going to try to address this problem? How do you lead an integrated life and be the same person at work, at home, in your community, and in your family life, and do what you want to do. Yes. Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, we formed about 25 years ago, and these are three couples that we knew well, and we meet once a month on Sunday nights, 6:30, and we have a program for an hour and a half, and it's kind of a potluck. Everyone brings some food, and somebody has a serious program. We talk about something important in our lives, okay? And we also, the couples group, not the men's group, but the couples group has traveled together a lot. So we've been hiking in Switzerland and Norway. We've been to Israel on a tour of the Holy Lands, and we've been to Colorado a lot, been lots of different places. But it's a very close group. These are really our best friends in the world now. Maybe they weren't when we formed, but they are now our best friends in the world. We talk openly if we have disagreements, which we've had some, and that's hard. But it's just been a wonderful bonding experience. And when Penny, it's still an emotional story, but when Penny was having her surgery for a mastectomy, she was upstairs at Abbott Northwestern Hospital in the operating room, and we were all sitting down below, the 6 people in the couples group plus my 7. I was the 7th, of course, sitting below kind of together supporting her surgery underneath the surgical suite. And they may sound kind of hokey to you, but I can tell you it was very, very important for us to felt like there was kind of, we were there with her in spirit. We couldn't be in the operating room, but it was very important to us, that sense. And that kind of support in your life, and knowing there are people that care about you, we can get through this. And each of us has had difficult times in our lives that we've had to go through together, and we can share those. We had difficult times in our personal lives, in our kids. Fortunately, in this group, there haven't been difficulties in the marriage. In my men's group, there's one guy that was separated from his wife for years, now come back. And to have someone to talk about with these things is really, I think, rather wonderful. But you can't form a group like this when you get in trouble. You know, the whole thing about a sports group is having it there that's there for you, and it's kind of there when you need it.
Can I say something about that? I mean, that said, that there are always tensions when you've been with any group of people over a period of time, and the key is really facing that and not breaking the group into small groups and talking behind people's backs. You know, one of the current issues that came up is the degree to which fundraising, because all of us are involved in the community, and some are more sort of involved with the fundraising than others, and that was a tension. Another was around how much political conversation there was, and so we really just talk about those things. We set aside a session to give feedback to one another. One of the guys in Bill's men's group is actually looking at writing a book about how you go about creating groups like that. Because there's nothing magical about it. It's something we all bring. I mean, you don't have to have a PhD to figure out how to do that, but there are a lot of reasons why groups like that can founder as well.
Okay.
Yeah?
Max?
So I have a group of guys in college who we met together basically while we were in college, but now we live all over the country. And the best we've been able to do, we get together once a year at one of my friends. It's not enough.
Looks better.
Hello? Okay. I was saying, my college friends, we get together once a year, and we go out on the lake and do things. But then we have a dinner on Saturday night, and we go around the table, and each of us talks for about an hour about our lives in some depth. Dinner lasts for like 7 or 8 hours, which has been a great, consistent kind of focal point in my life. But beyond that, we're terrible at email. We haven't really got anything going, phone-wise. Are your groups that have been going for 30 years, are they all in the same location, or have you been able to, have you spread out like we have and been able to maintain some sort of consistency?
No, we've actually fortunate to have a basic home, although where everyone's traveling and living in different places, so it makes it really hard to get everyone together. In the men's group, you can get, on an average, say, 5 or 6 of the 8 guys there. In the couples group, we kind of work on calendars to schedule around when everyone will be together. But it's hard. I know in my, we have these leadership discussion groups in my course, And a lot of them want to stay together afterward, and they stay together for the last semester at HBS, and some are trying to figure out how can I do this by email or Skype, but it's hard. But I think it's great you can get together. One of my mentees, who's now 50 or 51, has been getting together with a group of high school friends 2 or 3 times a year for 30 years. And it's very special when you can kind of, because the relationships stay together. You know, like you can come back together, it's like you haven't really been gone a year because you have a bond there. And that's the important thing. And if I suspect if there was a difficulty for one person in your group, Max, that everyone would kind of rally around that person, you know, even though you're in different locations. Other questions about anything we've discussed? Yes?
Bill, I wanted to ask specifically about, Maureen doesn't need a microphone, but okay. Specifically about, you know, you said that going forward people are going to want more meaning in their jobs and things like that, but can you give us some insight into jobs that people don't want? I mean, there are going to be jobs in society forever that people just don't want to do, and they're going to be part of organizations that we manage and be a part of. And
Yep.
you know, how do we build meaning for people who are doing repeated tasks and things like that? And sort of along that line, do you think they had a similar discussion in 1900 when they said, you know, leadership in this century is going to be different from leadership in any century before this? And what is it about now that makes you think it's so different?
Two very tough questions. First of all, I think in terms of jobs that don't appear to be as meaningful, that's why I used the Dave Dillon story from Kroger. Because, you know, these are stock boys. These are people at checkout lines. These are people working in the warehouse. But they're trying to recognize a simple yet a more important way to say this is really important. We are here for a purpose, and that's to make people feel good about being in the store. And rather than saying, somebody asks you, where's the Tabasco sauce? You don't say, lady, it's over in aisle 14. You actually walk her there. It's a simple thing, and I think people are looking for that simple relationship. Howard Schultz goes to 24 Starbucks stores a week and kind of observes the relationship with the employees, the barista, if you will, and customers. One of the reasons he went back in is because he was so concerned about how this relationship was being broken by a series of events that had taken place because they were growing so fast. So I think it can be done with financial services. I see it happening in Goldman Sachs all the time. So I think it can happen. Now, what about jobs with income people really don't want to do? I think if you can see that, okay, this is my job, I've got my role to play here, I'm the guy putting the brick on, but it's part of a greater calling, you know. That's what I think, you know, that's what leadership is. That's what your leadership is. How do you call? I mean, you're a Marine, not all those jobs are fun, right? And your job as a Marine captain or whatever, a leader, a platoon leader, you know, is to bring people together to sense we have a greater calling. Yeah, there's a lot of rotten jobs here, you know, but we've got a greater calling. It's just not you're a bad guy, you get a rotten job. It's that every person has a role to play in those, not just some of us elite. And I think if you can capture that in your own leadership.
Are they stuck in that job forever, or are there opportunities if
Yeah.
they do that well that you could? I mean, it sounds like they're in prison otherwise, and that nobody would want that. But I can't imagine that there are very many jobs where people are stuck there forever.
Yeah.
How about the second question?
You want to answer it?
No, I don't.
Okay, then
I just don't want it to be forgotten.
No,
because
I
it's a
didn't
really
forget. I will
important
answer
question.
it. I will take a shot at it. First of all, look, leadership is contextual. It's contextual around the people that you're working with every day. It has to vary. You have to flex your leadership style and what you do as a leader depending upon the people you're working with, their readiness to take on more responsibility. You can't impose responsibility on people that simply aren't able to take it, and you need to be flexible in doing that, and I think that's really critical. What I'm saying is that the culture has changed in fundamental ways, that people in your generation are looking for something different than maybe what people looked for in the 1950s when I was a little boy, or in the 60s and 70s when I started in the workplace. People are looking for something different. People are people, but I do think the context has really changed because of the nature of people and organizations. And all I'm suggesting, we need to adapt. The mobility, the global nature of organizations, this has changed things in very fundamental ways. Look, I went to Medtronic. It looked like the Norwegian Lutheran Church, okay? Everyone are good Christian people. They're all from Minnesota. Anyone from California and New York got rejected. One guy said, I'm Jewish. I'm the only vice president that's Jewish. Can I really survive here? I mean, you can't run a global organization like this. We had to change in fundamental ways. One of our top performers came to my office one day and closed the door. And he said, he didn't work for him, he worked a couple levels down, but he was really one of the top performers in the company. He was transforming the company. He said, I thought you and I agreed on a lot, but I don't understand this diversity stuff you're pushing. He said, because are you really willing to sacrifice the performance of the organization to make it more diverse? And I said, well, that's an interesting assumption you must have made, Mike. Your assumption is that by having more diverse people in the organization, that the performance is going to go down. Actually, I think it's just the opposite. If you're only willing to hire, as you are now, engineers from the North Dakota School of Mines, which is a nice, great school, you're just opening up yourself to a certain percentage of the population. If you're not willing to create an environment that's open to, people of different genders, different races, different religion, national origin, how can you have a great organization? How can you get the very best people? And I think if you're talking about it in a global sense, the key to running any global organization is how do you integrate the capacities of people around the globe to contribute around a common sense of mission and values. And that's hard. And that to me is a very different task than what the command and control leaders of the 50s did, than what, I thought the best leader of the 20th century, I happen to have a scholarship in his name, was Alfred Sloan of General Motors, because he created the modern organization. But it was a different task when he did that in the 20th century, early 20th century.
Did you want to say something more about that? Okay.
Other questions? No more questions.
I think it's lunchtime.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment about the equation you proposed, because as a pediatrician, I think a lot about children. Think a lot about children, how they're raised, and the communities they come from, and you see a vast array of ways of caring for children. And I'm always reminded that certainly the way I was raised is not the best way for all children. And there's a perception, particularly among people who are very well educated, that the solution to raising children can come externally, that we need expertise from someone else to tell us, if you can only read these books, or you go to these meetings, or you believe certain things, this will lead you to the path of raising your children well. When many of the most successful parents I've seen have really relied upon their families and their friends to say, not unlike the groups you belong to, what worked for you, or given our community structure, is it best that we put our kid in daycare, or is it best that we have our kids cared for communally?
Right.
And so it's always fascinating to me that parents of all sorts struggle with these issues all the time, and the solutions are so different, and some of them are so effective, and they're entirely different. And then I think my concern as a pediatrician is that parents have this misbelief that there's one way to raise a child.
Yeah.
So
I think that's
a
very
really
thoughtful.
wonderful
Thank you
point.
for sharing that. Very helpful.
And sometimes just asking the question allows the possibility of other options to surface. And so there are no dumb questions about things that are as important as some of what we're talking about.
One more question. Back there, yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal stories, and I'm going to ask some more about that. I guess, again, alluding to the equation, it seems like you've learned through experience that it doesn't quite add up to try and have it all. So my question would be around what trade-offs you've made to balance that equation in the past, and what you would have done differently in your 39 years together.
Whoa. That's a big question.
Got an answer?
Well, I think there are different phases, for one thing, in your life. And Bill's career demanded more of him than mine did. And the price of, for example, being part-time for me was minimal as a psychologist. I was working with a consulting firm, and so I could work that out more easily. So I was able to do things that might be difficult if both of us had been in corporate life, for example. But that was that phase of our lives where our kids really required and were worth that kind of time investment. It's easier now, and one of the things that I think I might have done differently is I think I might not have been as involved in the community at that point. It was very stressful. Not everybody gets as stressed out about those things as I did, about just I'm not that super well organized and multitasking and that kind of thing. And so to have a lot of responsibilities beyond kind of the two most important ones, I think was not the right thing for me. I mean, I didn't do so many things, but I think I would do a lot less. and just focus on family and work and friends. And friends are important to me. I mean, friends are a big part. Friends are the family you choose for yourself. That was very real for me. And so to be a good friend was a value.
I left home when I was 18, and of course I came back in summers and other times. But when my mother died, my father sold the house, and so I felt like I didn't really have a home. And so even though Penny and I went to Minnesota in 1970 for a year, it became our home. And when the career opportunities with Litton Industries to go out to California came along, or to go to Atlanta, Georgia with Coca-Cola, or go other places, I think we decided, I felt strongly that we wanted to stay in Minnesota, and that was going to be our home. And so I spent too much time in the community, although I must say my community involvement did lead to the opportunities first at Honeywell and then at Medtronic, so we changed jobs. And yes, we went to Belgium for 3 years in the 1980s. We went to Switzerland for a year in 2002, but we never gave up our home. And even here, I feel very guilty. I just went half-time officially at Harvard Business School because I didn't want to feel guilty about not being there for faculty meetings year-round, but because our home is in Minneapolis and in Cambridge. We have a condominium in Cambridge, and I'm here all fall, but we still have a home in Minneapolis, and I don't want to give that up. And if somebody says, why don't you retire and move to Florida and play golf every day, that's my version of Dante's 8th stage of hell, you know. Well, let me just close this.
Let me just say one more thing
Yes.
about that, if I may. We're both 65. He'll actually be 66 next week, but we're at this moment 65, and things really were different
Did you say
back then.
55?
65.
You missed 10 years there, Penny.
But when we got married, people were still saying love, honor, and obey in their marriage ceremonies. I didn't, but I mean a lot of people did. Women were. It was really not entirely accepted for women to go out for lunch with men, even at work. I mean, there was always some sort of tension around that. I mean, so a lot of things have shifted. A lot of the things that you take for granted weren't taken for granted then. Having cleaning help. One of the things that I was really glad that I did was, with some of the money that we had that was extra, getting help for various things that reduced the stress on me and on us, because he wasn't around to do it, and that was just more than. So I would just encourage you to think about the assumptions that are part of your life, part of your generation, and just question them all. You know, they may be the right thing for you or they might not, but you have a lot of options. And be aware of it.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
Let me just wrap this up with a couple of thoughts. One of my role models of a leader is Nelson Mandela. And he's talking about crucibles. How could, we've been talking about John McCain being a prisoner of war, how could anyone spend 27 years of their life from 44 to 71 as a prisoner and not come out angry? And not want to say, okay, now the blacks are going to be in power and we're going to exert power. This is what happened in Zimbabwe, and we've seen the ravages of that. And here's a man that said, no, it's all about South Africa. It's all about my country. And when he was elected president, he said, I stand in front of you, not as your president, but as your servant. And I'm prepared to devote the rest of my life to helping heal this country and bring it together as one country. And I think he's just a remarkable person. One of the things that's a quote that's often attributed as inaugural address actually didn't occur then, but he has used it many times, is from Marianne Williamson's Our Greatest Fear. And Williamson writes, our greatest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our greatest fear is we're powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be talented, brilliant, fabulous, gorgeous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking in front of other people so they will not feel inadequate around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us. It is in everyone. I really like those last two lines, because it's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. We all have those gifts. It's not that we're the elite and we have the gifts and everyone else can follow us. Each person has those gifts. And I think our role as leaders is trying to call upon the best side of people to use their gifts to the best of their ability in whatever walk of life they're in, whatever occupation or whatever stage of life they're in. Robert Kennedy said in Cape Town in 1966, a couple of years before he was assassinated, few will have the greatness to bend history itself, Now, there may be several of you in this room. I've not had that, but there may be several in your room who actually have the greatness to bend history itself. But Kennedy said, few will have the greatness to bend history itself. But each of us can commit to a small series of actions to improve the world. And in the sum total of all those actions will be written the history of this generation. And that's what I really believe for you. That if we can commit to taking on the really tough problems of the world, whether they're energy and the environment, healthcare, problems like education, global peace, global poverty, these are intractable problems that are going to require the actions of the many, the collaboration of many to really go after these problems. No one person can do that. And so I would just call on you to use your gifts to try to think about how can you contribute to these really tough problems. Because as far as I know, when you leave this world, the only thing you can take with you is what you leave behind. And that's why we started with the legacy. What are you going to leave behind when you leave this world? Because now's the time to think about that. So I'm looking forward to being with you the rest of the weekend and throughout the year. Thank you very much.